He flinched at every touch. Not a growl, not a hiss, just a full-body flinch, like something inside him was bracing for pain that never came, but that he was certain, always certain, was coming. The shelter staff had a name for cats like him: unadoptable. Not because he was sick, not because he was aggressive, because he would not let a single hand rest on his fur for longer than a second before he was gone, pressed into the farthest corner of his kennel, eyes wide, breath fast. They called him Ash. And what happened between Ash and one particular hand would end up changing everything the staff thought they knew about fear. Ash arrived at the shelter in early spring, found shivering under a loading dock behind a hardware store. A delivery driver spotted him wedged between two pallets, soaked from an overnight storm, too weak to run when they approached. Nobody knew how long he'd been out there. Nobody knew what had happened to him before that. All they knew was written in his body. The way he curled his paws under himself so tightly they barely touched the ground. The way his ears dropped flat the second a door opened. The way he watched every hand in the room, tracking it, waiting for it to move too fast. The intake vet noted old scarring along one hind leg, healed but uneven, the kind that comes from something left untreated for too long. Whatever Ash had survived before the loading dock, it had taught him one lesson clearly: hands were not safe. A volunteer named Grace was the one who found him a kennel spot. She was quiet by nature, the kind of person who moved through rooms without disturbing the air in them. The other volunteers joked that she'd talk to the animals like they were old friends catching up after years apart. With Ash, that gentleness wasn't enough. Not at first. For the first 2 weeks, Grace didn't touch him at all. She sat outside his kennel every evening reading out loud, her voice low and even, never rising, never demanding anything back. Ash watched her from the corner. He didn't have to. She wasn't asking him to. The other staff worried. A cat that wouldn't accept touch couldn't be examined properly, couldn't get vaccines without sedation, couldn't, realistically, ever be adopted. One vet tech tried a routine checkup, and Ash bit down hard enough to draw blood, then spent the rest of the day pressed against the back wall of his kennel, shaking. "He's not aggressive," Grace told them. "He's terrified. There's a difference." Nobody argued with her. Nobody had a better plan either. By week 3, something small began to shift. Ash started sitting closer to the front of the kennel while Grace read, not touching the bars, just closer. By week 4, he would press his face, just barely, against the mesh when she got up to leave, as if some part of him wanted to follow and some part of him still didn't trust it. Grace began bringing a folded towel that carried her scent. She'd leave it in his kennel overnight, take it home, bring it back the next day, still smelling like her. It sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. For a cat who had learned that closeness meant danger, a familiar smell was proof that danger hadn't followed him this time. Then came the night everything nearly fell apart. A new dog was brought in for overnight boarding, barking echoing down the concrete hallway for hours. Ash spent the whole night pressed into the corner of his kennel, and by morning he wouldn't even look at Grace. His food sat untouched, his water bowl hadn't been moved. Weeks of progress seemed to have vanished in a single loud night. Another volunteer suggested moving him to a quieter facility across town, starting over somewhere with less noise, less foot traffic. Grace disagreed. Starting over meant a new room, new smells, new strangers, everything Ash had spent weeks learning to survive without panic. She was certain that moving him now would undo far more than one bad night ever could. So she sat outside his kennel anyway. She didn't push, she just stayed, reading the same worn paperback she always carried, her voice steady even when his eyes wouldn't meet hers. If a story like this is already tugging at something in your chest, this is exactly why we keep finding cats like Ash and telling their stories. So stick around, because what happens next is the part people never forget. It took another 11 days to rebuild what one bad night had taken away. 11 days of sitting, of reading, of leaving that same towel night after night until it smelled less like Grace's apartment
Grace
and more like safety
different.
itself.
She didn't reach
On the 12th
toward
day,
him.
Grace
She
did
simply
something
rested her
different.
open palm
She didn't
on the floor
reach
of the
toward
kennel.
him. She
Inches
simply
from where
rested
he
her
sat
open
and
palm
went
on the
still.
floor of the kennel.
Completely
Inches
still.
from where he
no
sat
movement
and went still.
No coaxing.
Completely
Just
still.
an open hand.
No movement.
Waiting.
No coaxing.
Asking nothing.
Just an open
hand, stared at it for a long moment,
nothing.
his ears
usually
stared
flat
at it
with
for
worry,
a long moment,
tilted forward
his ears
slightly,
usually
then
flat with
so
worry,
slowly
tilted
that Grace
forward
barely
slightly.
dared to breathe.
Then
So
he leaned
slowly
down
that
and
Grace
pressed his
barely
face
dared
into
to
her
breathe.
palm.
He
Not a
leaned
sniff,
down and
not a
pressed his
cautious
face
tap of
into
a
her
paw.
palm.
His entire
Not a sniff,
face, not a
eyes
cautious
closing,
tap of a paw.
weight settling
his entire
into her
face,
hand like he had
eyes
been
closing,
waiting his whole
weight
life
settling
for
into
permission
her
to
hand
stop
like he had
bracing.
been waiting his whole
Grace
life
didn't
for
move.
permission
Her
to
arm
stop
ached
bracing.
from staying still.
Grace
but
didn't
she
move.
didn't dare
Her
shift
arm
even
ached from
an
staying
inch.
still.
She
But
let
she
him stay
didn't
there
dare
as
shift
long as he
even an
wanted.
inch.
And he
She
stayed
let him
for
stay
nearly
there
a
as
full
long
minute
as he wanted
before pulling
and he
back,
stayed for
blinking,
nearly a
almost
full
startled
minute
by his
before
own
pulling
trust,
back,
as if
blinking,
some part of him
almost
was
startled
still
by his
waiting
own
for the
trust,
moment it would
as
go
if some
wrong.
part of him
It
was
didn't
still
go wrong.
waiting for the
Grace
moment
kept
it
her
would go
hand
wrong.
exactly where
It didn't
was.
go wrong.
Open.
Grace
unmoving,
kept her hand
and after
exactly
a
where
few
it was.
seconds,
Ash
open,
leaned back
unmoving,
in on his own.
and after a few
Nobody
seconds,
had told him
Ash
to.
leaned
Nobody
back
had
in on his
coaxed
own.
him.
He
Nobody
chose
had
it.
told him to.
Twice
Nobody
in the span
had
of a
coaxed him.
single evening.
He chose
and
it.
for a cat
Twice
who had
in
spent
the span
months
of a
bracing
single
for
evening.
pain,
And for
choosing
a
it
cat who had
twice
spent
was
months
everything.
bracing for pain.
From that day forward,
choosing it
something
twice
had
was
changed
everything.
for good.
From
Ash
that day
began
forward,
seeking
something
out her
had
hand
changed for
instead
good.
of avoiding it.
Ash began
he would wait by
seeking
the front
out
of
her
the kennel
hand
in the
instead of
evenings,
avoiding it.
and the moment
He would
she
wait
sat
by
down,
the front of
he'd
the kennel
press
in
his
the
head
evenings,
into her
and
palm
the moment
before
she
she
sat
even
down,
had the
he'd
chance to
press
offer
his
it.
head into her
The
palm
staff who had
before
once
she
called
even
him
had the chance to
unadoptable
offer it.
started calling
The
him
staff
something
who had
else,
once called
a
him
late
unadoptable
bloomer,
started
cat who
calling him
simply
something
needed
else,
someone
a
willing to
late
wait.
bloomer.
Word
A cat
got
who
around the
simply
shelter
needed
and
someone
eventually
willing
to
to
a
wait.
family who had
Word
been
got
searching
around the
for a
shelter
cat for
and
months.
eventually to
One
a
who
family
wouldn't
who had
mind
been
a slower
searching for a
kind of
cat
love.
for months.
When they met
One
Ash,
who wouldn't
he
mind a
didn't
slower
run to greet
kind of
them
love.
the way some cats
When they
do.
met Ash,
He watched
he
from
didn't
the corner
run to greet
cautious
them the way
the
some
way
cats
he'd
do.
watched everyone
He watched
at
from the
first.
corner,
But
cautious
when the father
the way
knelt
he'd
down
watched
and
everyone
rested his
at
open
first.
palm on the
But
ground,
when the father
still
knelt down
patient,
and rested his
asking
open
for
palm
nothing,
on the ground,
Ash walked
still
forward
patient,
and did exactly
asking
what
for
he had
nothing,
learned to do
Ash
with Grace.
walked forward
He
and
pressed
did
his
exactly
face
what
into
he
that
had learned to
stranger's
do
hand
with Grace.
and closed his
He
eyes.
pressed his face
The
into that
family
stranger's
adopted him
hand
3
and
days
closed his
later.
eyes.
Grace
The
visited
family
once just
adopted
to see
him
how
3
he was
days
settling
later.
in.
Grace
found
visited
him curled
once
on a
just to see
windowsill,
how he was
sunlight
settling in,
across his
and
fur,
found him
utterly
curled on a windowsill,
unbothered by the
sunlight
noise of a
across
busy
his fur,
household around
utterly
him. He
unbothered
didn't
by the
flinch when the
noise
father
of a busy
reached to
household
scratch
around
behind
him.
his ears.
He didn't flinch when the
leaned
father
into it.
reached to scratch
Because
behind his
trust,
ears.
once it's
He
earned
leaned
the slow
into
way,
it.
has a way
Because
of
trust,
staying
once
quietly,
it's earned the slow
permanently,
way,
has a
long
way
after
of
the
staying
fear that came
quietly,
before it has been
permanently.
forgotten. Long after
Ash
the
never
fear that
needed
came before
rescuing
it
from
has been
danger.
forgotten.
He needed something
Ash
quieter
never needed
and
rescuing
in its
from
own way,
danger.
much
He
harder
needed
to
something
give,
quieter
patience
and without
without own way,
conditions.
much
Love
harder
that
to
didn't
give,
ask him
patience
to hurry.
without conditions.
Sometimes the
Love
animals
that
who
didn't
take the
ask him
longest
to
to trust us
sometimes
end up
the
loving
animals
the
who
hardest
take the
once they
longest
finally
to trust
do.
us
End
would
up
you have
loving
had
the
the
hardest
patience to
once
wait
they
12
finally
days
do.
for a single
Would you
touch,
have had the
or
patience
would you have
to
given
wait
up
12
sooner?
days for
Tell
a
me in
single
the
touch,
comments. Or would you have given up sooner? Tell me in the comments.